Welcome back to the Weight Room. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to have another great episode. We have guest on today, Tajs Deshawn. He's going to be sharing a little bit about what he does, and we're going to be talking about what is the world for an athlete after athletics. And this, if you're not an athlete, this still applies to you. You know, it has a lot to do with, figuring out what you want to do, figuring out what your why is, figuring out how to, go out and achieve what you want to achieve. And I think it's a great conversation, so stay tuned and enjoy it and pick something up from it. And before we get started, just want to remind you to subscribe wherever you're listening, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Leave a rating and a review there, and that's very appreciated. And that is it. Let's dive right into this episode.
I love what you're doing, man. Excited to be part of it.
I do appreciate you coming on. And if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, tell us who you are, tell us a little bit about you, what you do.
Sure, man. First of all, thanks again for having me. Like I said, I've become a fan of your show since we connected on IG, and honored to be a guest, man. But my name is Tajs Deshawn. I'm an athlete career transition coach. I'm also an author of these two books you see behind me. One is called ThriveAfterSports, helping athletes dominate the game of life. The other one is Athlete to Entrepreneur. That's a co-author collaboration book. Myself and 20 other former athletes came together to tell our stories, talk about our road and our journey to entrepreneurship. We want that book to really be a roadmap and a source of inspiration for that next generation of athletes coming up behind us, to show them like, hey, you don't have to be LeBron James or Magic Johnson or somebody like that to be an entrepreneur. You have everything it takes to do it now. So all that being said, on top of being an athlete career transition coach, I'm an author. I'm a podcast host. I host the ThriveAfterSports podcast. Last but not least, I'm vice president of Self-Publishing 30 Days, which is the number one self-publishing company in the world. That's the company that helped me publish these two books. And since coming on board as VP of that company, I'm helping build out a sports division, and we're helping a lot of athletes publish books, get their stories out to the world, leverage their books for speaking engagements and business opportunities. So I wear a few different hats, man, but it's all intertwined, and I'm on a mission, brother. That's a little bit about me.
Kind of tell us a little bit of a background about your athletic experience and how you transitioned and kind of how you use that experience to help others.
Yeah, man, my transition was rough. I played football at Stony Brook University out in Long Island, and I didn't have a great career there. To be honest, I think it was twofold. I always say I'm not a victim, so I could have done a lot of things better in terms of my attitude and how I dealt with the coaches. I loved all my teammates, but my attitude with the coaches could have been better. I think I wasn't used to not being the man. You know how that goes. And so I struggled, and I knew I wasn't going to play in the NFL because I didn't have this star-studded college career. But yet, like most athletes, whether the professional sports is in the picture or not, when I hung up that jersey for the last time, that's when the struggle started. And so I had no idea what I was in for, man. I came back home, moved back home, from New York back to California. And I always tell people, man, I found myself in my childhood bedroom, just waking up day after day, like, what the hell is going on? Like, how did I get here? Mom's telling me to take out the trash. I'm looking at all my little Pop Warner trophies, no job prospects, no type of income. Just the struggle. I went immediately into the struggle with no idea of how I was going to get out of it. So at that time, a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, a lot of just distracting myself from what I was going through. And after a while, man, I started to dig myself out of that hole. I found some career success in recruiting, because I always loved working with people and helping people. And that eventually led me into, there's a whole backstory behind it, man. I don't want to be talking your ear off or talking the listeners' ears off. But that world that I entered to in recruiting, combined with my passion for wanting to help athletes, it fueled me to want to do something so I could basically reach back to that younger version of myself and help athletes get through that dark period that I went through for those few years. And that's kind of how I was born, man. And yeah, I'll just leave it right there for right now.
Gotcha. And I know something for non-athletes, it's tough. And that is the idea of, like, you have to have your life figured out when you're, 18 or 21, 22, getting out of high school or getting out of college. I'm not sure, you can kind of tell me for sure on this one, but like it seems like as an athlete, you, especially one who's going to maybe move on to college and maybe even further, you have this like you have this path that a lot of non-athletes, they don't have that. But if you don't necessarily get to continue down that road of athletics, or whenever your athletic career is over for whatever reason, it's kind of like you have to do all that thinking that, us non-athletes had to do, and you have to do it very quickly. And it seems like that would be very overwhelming.
Yeah, that's exactly it, man. And I don't want to discredit, it's not, like you said, it's not just about athletes. Anyone who's 18 going into college, how are you supposed to know what the hell you're doing with your life? You just kind of, most people go into college because they just kind of, it's just what you do, and they don't necessarily know what's going to come on the other side of it. They're just kind of following the path that's been laid out before us, like you said. And a lot of even non-athletes, when you graduate from college, I think there's a very small percentage of people who actually know what they want to do and how they're going to do it. I think the only thing that, to your point, separates athletes or makes it a little bit more challenging is that on top of your classwork and your schoolwork, you just have sports 24/7, film, practice, game, rinse and repeat. And it's day in and it's day out. There's no time to even think of a life when you're playing at that level. There's no time to think of a life outside of it. So while non-athlete students have some time to prepare, or at least to start laying a foundation or gain some clarity around what they want to do, athletes virtually have none, and so that's the mission I'm on, not only to help athletes start early, but more importantly, to kind of meet them where they're at when they're done playing and be able to walk them through those progressions to help them find that clarity. Because up until that point, 99% of them, and that's just a statistic I just made up right now, but based on what I'm seeing, the athletes I work with, 99% of them have no idea. I know I didn't for sure. And so you kind of need someone who's been in your shoes to be able to help you find that clarity and map out those next stages of their lives. So, yeah, man.
Did you have any like coaches or teachers or professors or anyone in high school or college, asking you the question of, hey, what do you want to do when this is over?
Not at all, man. Not at all. I think I'll say this. I think in recent years, especially the past 5 years, I would say universities, especially professional teams, but universities also have done a great job of stepping it up with asking those questions and with helping prepare. In my case, I graduated from college in 2013. So there were none of those conversations. Around that time, I can't speak for all schools, but based on the stories I've heard and based on my experience, that's not really their job. They're there to keep the players eligible. They're there to make sure the players that are coming in next year are going to be able to stay eligible. So there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about life after the game. It was more so just, hey, these are your classes. These are easy. We'll help you skate by so you can graduate. That was pretty much it, man.
Back in the day, if you go back 30, 40, 50 years, I think it was just a lot easier to find a job that you could live off of.
Oh, 100%, Daniel. I think that makes perfect sense, man. I think, like you said, the world has changed a lot. Gone are the days when going to college is a guaranteed path to success. I think you have to almost come into the business world, the working world, so to speak, with an entrepreneurial spirit. And the good thing about it is we have all the tools to do so. So I think it's twofold. The world has changed, but also you have to have a different mindset where when you're done playing your sport, or even if you're a non-athlete, when you graduate from college, nobody's waiting on you with the job. Something I always says, you have to create your own opportunities, whether that's creating a role within a company or creating something that you can do on the side, like maybe turning the side hustle into the main hustle. But bottom line is, yeah, the world's changed. You can't rely on a piece of paper to take you to the level of success that you see for yourself. So I'm in agreement with you, brother.
So explain to us a little bit about what you do. Like if I were to come to you, I'm getting out of athletics, what would our first conversation be?
Our first conversation with me really just be listening to you, to be honest, because usually what happens is up until that point, an athlete hasn't had a chance to really express what they're going through. So I'm spending, especially during that first call, man, I'm spending a lot of time just listening, letting them get things off their chest, things they may not have felt comfortable saying to other people. The fact that I've been through it makes me relatable, and I think allows people to open up about their experience. But what I do, man, from A to Z is I look at it as I want to take someone from being in this place of being lost to, by the time we're done working together, they don't need me anymore. They're equipped with tools for the rest of their life. I'm not trying to keep anybody dependent on me. But my goal is to take a former athlete from being completely lost, struggling with the fact that they're no longer an athlete, struggling with their identity, and be able to help them move past that, to heal from that fall from grace, so to speak, to be able to construct a new identity, going back to that word create that I used earlier, and be able to map out a game plan where they can envision where they want to be 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, so they can start laying the foundation and connecting with people who can help them get there. So it's a process, man, but I'm very intentional about it. I start with that emotional piece first because I don't want to start talking to someone. I want to be like, hey, Daniel, so what are you thinking about doing for your career? Meanwhile, you're struggling, you're drinking all the time and all that type of stuff. We got to address those things up front so we can move past them, and then we can get to work on creating those next stages. So that's pretty much how that's my process.
And it seems like there's a lot of psychology that goes into this, understanding how a human kind of feels in a certain situation. And like you said, you kind of have that experience yourself, so you can kind of understand that a little bit better. But like, how much do you feel like it is a psychological journey for that athlete coming out, and then like not just when they initially come to you, but like just along the way as well? Because it's kind of like in the world of fitness or in the world of trying to get right with your diet. Like, we all kind of have motivation to make that first step, and then we can kind of fall back into our old routines and old habits. So it seems like that would kind of maybe be the same with that as well.
Oh, 100%, man. I love how you said the psychological part of it, because, it's not just, oh, now they're having psychological challenges when they're done playing. It's during the career. It's before that. Even like you said, when it comes to people struggling with diet and exercise, that is a psychological challenge as well. All of life is a psychological challenge, man. So I think I knew that was going to be a major piece going into it. And so when I was building out my curriculum, I was very intentional about addressing those things, not only up front, but throughout. And that's what I mean by I want to give people lasting tools, so that when they have things that come up down the line, like we all go through transitions. It's not just you transition out of college into the working world, so to speak. There are levels of transition at every stage in life. And so my job is to really help instill tools in people, specifically former athletes, because that's who I'm serving, but instill those tools where they'll be able to navigate and handle any transition that they run into for the rest of their life. Because like you said, you need the tools to be able to navigate those psychological issues. Otherwise, they can drag you down.
Yeah, I think one thing that I find interesting is like that idea of transition, because I think we're all in that constant search for comfort, that comfort zone. And it can be something we search for, but it can also be something very dangerous. We get into a comfort zone, and then whenever something challenging occurs, we're not equipped to handle it all the time. And I think that's one thing with like fitness and health and sports. There's so many different avenues you could go down with this, but like they kind of put you in that area to be able to cope with a new challenging scenario. So I think understanding the new context of like, oh, this is a business context, or this is I'm going back to school context, or whatever it is, like just figuring out that the algorithm's kind of the same. You're just putting it into this new context.
Oh man, I love that. I love that. And that's something I'm really big on too, is the parallels between athletics and life. You know what I mean? And just how if you treat life like a sport, then good things happen for you, especially if you grew up playing a sport. And so I always tell people, I tell my former athletes, every single day you got to implement film, practice, and game, because your games aren't just a couple times a week or once a week anymore. You're playing the game of life every single day. And I also tell people you should be excited about that, because usually when someone's done playing their sport, I work with some professional athletes, but mostly college athletes. That's my sweet spot, right? And so you got to think these are 22, 23-year-olds most of the time, maybe 24, 25. I've worked with people in their late 20s as well, but these are people mostly in their early 20s. I always tell them you got like 70, 80 years of life left on this planet to play the game of life every single day. So the better you can get at playing the game of life, the better your outcomes are going to be. That means working on your skills. That means film, practice, game every single day. What does that look like? Okay, obviously you're playing a game every single day, which means you got to execute, but you also want to be implementing some film, which means studying, learning, reading books, sharpening your sword in whatever your industry is, so that the next day you can play the game better because you were preparing the day before. So I love that analogy, man. And I love what you shared about just treating life like a sport. I think that's so key for people to hear.
I like that thing you just said as well. The watching the film and getting better, and that's a cool way to think about it because every day is a new game, and it's like you're playing. It's kind of cool because you have two opponents in a way. You're playing yourself from yesterday, but you're also playing all these different people out here in the world trying to, not necessarily like beat them per se, but everybody's competing constantly. It's part of the culture we live in, and yeah, I think I think a really cool way to look at it. And you mentioned like reading books and things like that. And do you have any? And it could be just up to a person, or maybe you don't recommend any books. But do you have any books that you do recommend people read?
Oh, that's such a tough question, Daniel. I always struggle with this one because it's like you said, it varies from person to person. So books that have been extremely impactful on me, I can say The Power of Now and A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. I think I'm saying his name correctly. But during a rough patch in my life, I always recommend that book to people because it teaches you how to be mindful and how to observe your thoughts and how to not be emotionally impacted by things. And it was very grounding for me when I read that book. Another one is The Motivation Manifesto by Brendan Burchard. I think I'm saying his name. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. But that book, the thing about that book, I recommend that for everyone because it sounds like, oh, great, the Motivation Manifesto, like great, a rah motivation book. I can go on YouTube for motivation. That's not what that book is about, man. That book, it really cuts to the core and really forces you to examine what it is that drives you. So he goes super deep. Like he had me weeping at one point, thinking about, okay, this isn't just about me. Like my life, my time here is borrowed. What can I do? How can I have an impact on others? Like, how am I going to be remembered? And he forces you to create things that keep you motivated so that you don't have to constantly like try to look for motivation. You're just motivated by default because you've already cemented the things that motivate you. So that's a fire one. Last but not least, I keep it on my desk. This is really only for men, The Way of the Superior Man. The subtitle is A Spiritual Guide to Mastering the Challenges of Women, Work, and Sexual Desire. And, what man couldn't use some type of reinforcement or support in those three areas, right? So I recommend that to men, but, women, if you might want to give it a read too and just pass it on to the men in your life.
Yeah, that's cool. You'll have to send me those in the messages, and I'll have to put those in the description and stuff like that. When it comes to your own writing though, how did you get into that?
Man, it's I always tell people when you're trying to help someone else, you end up helping yourself. Because to be honest with you, Daniel, I never had any intentions of writing a book. Like I would see other people write books and I'd be like, oh, that's cool, good for them. But I was just in my own little world of coaching and doing the podcast. And so what happened was I had a client, he was an overseas basketball player. He wanted to do a book. And so I started doing research in my network around who had published books because I was looking to get more information. So a friend of mine, Joy Walker, she has a book called The Sweet Spot. It's about athlete transition as well. And I loved her book and I thought it was very well done. And so I basically referred my client to this company, Self-Publish in 30 Days. So they did an excellent job with his book. And I'm like, okay, he's not going to be the last person who tells me that he wants to write a book. I want to set up a referral system with this company. So to make a long story short, I reached out to the owner of the company, Darren Palmer, and we just hit it off instantly. He was like, hey, man, we can definitely do some referrals, but, I think you should start out by doing your own book. And so I was like, maybe when I'm old and gray, maybe someday when I've made it, whatever that means. And he was like, yeah, you can do that, but you can also write a book now with the knowledge that you have currently, and that's going to impact a lot of people. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm in. So I write the book, I'm working on it, and then he becomes like a business mentor to me. And then it became bigger than the book. That's when I came on board with the company, and he's really teaching me just everything. I went from being a solopreneur to an entrepreneur. But to answer your question, I had no intention of writing a book until I met Darren Palmer, and he really just poured into me and told me that I had a lot to offer right now. And so that's how Thrive After Sports was born. And that's how the collaboration project, Athletes Entrepreneur, was born. And we got a lot more books coming out soon, man. So I've caught the author bug, and I really enjoy it now.
Yeah, and I think one thing about writing a book that's really cool is you kind of get to dive into yourself and self-reflect, and it's almost like meditating in a way. And I've never, done a book, but just the writing I've done in school about some things, and it's a really cool kind of like experience that you get to put yourself through. What's your kind of like your writing routine?
Yeah, man. And so everybody's different, as you know. I have my own preferences, and there's some things that at Self Publish in 30 Days we recommend for people who are starting the process of writing too. Before I get into that, I don't want to forget what you said. I had to write it down because I thought how you described writing a book is almost like a meditation. I really think you hit the nail right on the head with that one, man. I think that was really great because I definitely experienced that. And I know a lot of authors experience that, especially when you're writing the book to have an impact on people. So it's not just all about you, but it's also like, I'm writing this because I know it's going to help someone else. What I found was that, and this is feedback I hear from a lot of authors too, throughout the writing process, it is like a meditation. It forces you to be introspective and not only test your knowledge, but also test your emotions and, going back on past traumas and things like that. And so the writing process itself was very healing for me. And I know that it's the same case for a lot of other people. I know, unless you're writing like, Captain Underpants or something like that, or like a fantasy book, but if it's a personal
Big
story.
fan of the Captain Underpants.
Oh man, I love Captain Underpants back in the day.
Yes.
Oh man, don't get me started on that. But the writing process. You asked about the writing process. So for me personally, inspiration strikes me at random moments, and so I always want to be prepared. I don't want to like not have a way to be able to record my thoughts. So I do all kind of stuff, man. Like you talked about writing at night or writing in the morning. I always recommend people write before they go to sleep and when they wake up, because you're writing before you go to sleep. It's the end of the day. You're kind of in that, about to pass out state, but then you're falling asleep thinking about and processing subconsciously what you just wrote down. And you wake up in the morning and you're still in that dream state when you first wake up. And I recommend just writing immediately, whether that looks like actually going to sit down in front of a laptop or just having Google Docs on your phone. I keep the Google Docs app on my phone because, like I said, you never know when you're going to have that random moment of inspiration, but you have to be intentional about, I say, getting touches every single day. You have to make sure that you're writing every day. Otherwise, it's going to take you forever to write the book, just a quick note, another thing, and then I'll kind of wrap it up. But another thing I like to do is record myself talking, and you're a podcaster, you'll get this. So like, I would always listen back to episodes, especially solo episodes, or if I'm driving around, I would record myself just talking about something that I think would be great for the book. And then later that night or early in the morning, I would listen back to the recording and kind of type it up. Instead of transcribing it word for word, I would listen and pull out what I thought was important and write it that way. So that's what's been helpful for me. And those are some things that we kind of recommend for other people to do. I can get into like the structure of it and everything, but I don't want to go down too deep into the rabbit hole, man. I'll just leave it at that.
You mentioned like using a laptop or using your phone or something like that. Have you ever been one to like get the pencil and paper out?
Yes, but I never wanted to, just as an example, write a whole manuscript or a whole chapter by hand, because I'm gonna have to type that bad boy up at some point. So I'm like, yeah, I'll just type it. But I have written stuff by hand, just if I have random moments of inspiration. And then the cool part about that is, like, let's say you write a few sentences by hand, that few sentences might turn into a few paragraphs once you start typing it, Just another, for anyone who may be thinking about writing a book, just another quick word of advice, because it can be overwhelming if you're like, I'm going to write a book, right? And then you just open up your laptop and you're staring at a blank screen and you're like, I don't know if I can do this. So what we recommend is that, and this is something we use at Self-Publish in 30 Days, we recommend that you start with topics, right? So for you, like if you were writing a book about exercising or weightlifting, you would start with, I'm just using examples, but like, okay, lower body, upper body, diet, nutrition. And instead of just starting from scratch in a blank screen, now you have different topics. You don't even call them chapters yet, but these topics can guide you. So every time you open up your phone or your laptop and you're like, okay, today, you know what, I'm going to talk about nutrition today. And you just go in on nutrition. And then the next day you're like, okay, I think I want to talk about lower body or recovery. Okay, I'm going to type that. And before you know it, you've been expanding on all these different topics. And now all that's left to do is really get it organized and turn it into a manuscript. So just a quick word to the wise right there. Another quick thing just for people listening is that ebooks are great. I'm not knocking ebooks. I think they definitely serve a purpose. But there's something about having a physical book, not only from a standpoint that it exists in time and space and, it sits on people's shelves, even if they never read it, they think of you every time they see it. But also, if you're someone who does speaking gigs or something like that, it's when you show up to an event, you can bring your ebook with you and tell people where to download it, but it's better if you have a physical copy so people leave with something to remember you by. So I always tell people, even if you have an ebook, make sure you turn that into a physical copy someday or use that as the foundation for your physical book. So
Yeah.
anyway, quick tangent. Sorry about that, man.
No, I think that is cool to have that kind of like physical proof of like what you did. And I'm a huge audiobook listener, but I do also like to collect books, and I'm guilty of not reading the books I actually have like tangible copies of. I'll go listen to the audiobooks instead, but it is something about just like seeing a book that just like, it makes you feel a little bit more like in a weird way, it makes you feel like you're connected to that story.
That's a great point. Yeah. And which is why I recommend, as an author, you want to have that, because you want your readers to have that experience of that deeper connectedness, not just with you, but your mission and what's the message that you're trying to get across. So great points, man.
And when it comes to writing a book with other people, what are kind of some of the unique struggles or positives when it comes to that?
I'd say there's definitely more positives than struggles. One of the only struggles, just to start with the bad news up front, is that you're dealing with a lot of moving parts. So of course the projects take longer. We're dealing with human beings. So like my book has 20 authors in it. It took about 6 months or so to complete, because that's 20 different people who need editing, all that type of stuff. The great part about it is that, so let's say, if you're already an author, like I wrote one chapter, right? Everyone writes a chapter. So I was already an author because I wrote Thrive After Sports. Now I write one chapter for Athlete to Entrepreneur. Boom, I'm a 2-time published author. There are people in this book and Athlete to Entrepreneur who have written 2 books. You write a chapter for Athlete to Entrepreneur for my book. Now you're a 3-time author. If you're a first-time author and you've never written anything ever, writing one chapter for the collaboration project, you're a published author now, and all you wrote is one chapter. And then the way we structure it, because we're a self-publishing company, is that when the book actually comes out, number one, as a company, we don't take any royalties from the authors. And then number two, everyone's chapter is copywritten to them. So what that means is basically like you have a book inside of a book. So not only are you a published author by writing one chapter, but now you can sell that book as an individual, and you don't have to split the profits 20 different ways because you have equal ownership over the book. So it's great, man. And then networking too, right? So someone might buy the book from me, but they get access to these 20 other stories, and all their social media handles are in there. So it's cross-pollinating networks too, because that book is going into 20 different people's networks, and all of their networks are buying directly from them, but getting exposure to the other authors. So it's cool, man. We have a lot of collaboration projects coming out right now. People are really starting to gravitate towards that concept. And I have the pleasure of being able to oversee those projects too, and just kind of put people together and figure out who wants to work with who. And we got some cool stuff coming out, man. We are flooding the block. We are flooding the marketplace with co-author books. You're going to see, especially over the next year or two, for sure.
That's cool. That's really exciting.
All of us are sitting on a gold mine of information. You don't have to just open up your laptop and stare at a blank screen or try to come up with different topics. Like if you're a podcaster, everything you need to write a book is already in that podcast. If you're a blogger, whatever the case may be, like we're all sitting on this gold mine of information. It's just a matter of putting it together or getting with experts. Shout out to Self-Publish in 30 Days again, getting with experts who can help you consolidate all that and make it something that people are actually going to want to pick up and read. So yeah, man, you're sitting on a gold mine for sure with your podcast.
You mentioned 2019 is when you started the podcast, but like what made you start that podcast? What inspired you to do that?
That was another one of those situations where I never planned on starting a podcast. What actually happened was, because I started Thrive After Sports and I started doing the coaching late 2017 going into 2018. And so basically I spent all of 2018 perfecting my craft, making tweaks to the curriculum. I worked with a lot of people for free or for referrals just to make sure that what I was doing was actually worth it, and that I was actually putting my best foot forward as a coach. And so what happened was, man, going into 2019, in addition to the coaching, I'm like, okay, I want to start putting out content. So I was hitting LinkedIn heavy because LinkedIn at the time, and it still really is, it's a great platform for getting, new eyes. Like just because the algorithm, you can get so many views, especially if you post a video on LinkedIn. So I started putting these videos out. I would record like 10-minute videos, 5-10 minute videos, just talking about transition or my experience, or I might even interview a client I was working with, a former athlete. And I would post 1-minute clips on LinkedIn, and I would have the link to the full video at the bottom. And I'm like, okay, people are I'm getting great feedback on the clips, but nobody's watching the full videos on YouTube. And I'm like, okay, well, people are probably on the go or they're at work. This was pre-pandemic. So it was like, no one's going to sit here and watch this 10-minute YouTube video. So I'm just going to strip the audio and upload the audio as a podcast. That way people can listen on the go or while they're working out or whatever. And so that's what I did. And it's definitely evolved, man. Just as, I started listening to some of your earlier episodes, like, how it goes. You start out and the podcast evolves over time. And so it used to just be me on there talking, which was great. I got good feedback on those episodes, but then I'm like, oh, you know what? Let me interview some of the athletes that I've worked with. Let me let them talk about, not just me helping them so I can look like the hero, but how did you get through it? And, what were the steps that you took to be able to get to the other side? And then I'm like, okay, it's great for me to interview my clients, but what if I start interviewing other athletes who are out in the world doing great things? And then so that evolved into now I'm interviewing former athletes who are business owners or high ups at companies or just doing really dope things in the world. And so that's how it started, just wanting to get more people, get more exposure for my mission and what I'm trying to do to help athletes. And then it's become a platform for me to show, like, look at all these great athletes who are, hence the name, thriving after sports. And so it's been great, man.
Yeah. And I think a podcast it's a cool way to get to talk to people. And when you have conversation, can't say the word conversations, you learn a lot about yourself. And I've had that over several, what is it, going on 18 months now? I was going to say like several months, but it's been quite a while longer than that, of the podcast, learning kind of different things about myself, areas where I'm maybe doing better than I thought, areas where I could improve. And it just kind of makes you sit back and think, okay, this is kind of really me in a way. So what have you learned about yourself? Not just, with the podcast, but with everything you've been doing to help other people?
Wow. That's a great question, man. I think I've learned, well, it makes me think of a few things, actually. One thing that came to mind with your question is that I've learned how persistent I am with things that I actually believe in. Because before I started ThriveAfterSports in 2017, I don't think I ever kept a job for more than a year, and that's because when I came out of college, I was just looking for something that was going to pay the bills or just so I could make some money. And so because I didn't enjoy it, I was always looking for the next thing. There's nothing wrong with like looking to put yourself in a better position, but I wasn't necessarily going up. I was just going to like, this job sucks. I'm going to go do something else because I had no clarity and no vision. And so through the podcast and through the books and everything else I got going on, I'm like, because there was no money at first, right? I found ways, not by charging the athletes, but through sponsorships and partnerships and all this different stuff to be able to actually make a living off of doing this work now. And for the first year or two, I didn't see a dime. And then it started to slowly but surely, I took part-time jobs and did what I had to do. But I learned that, and I think this applies to most people, not just me. I think that when you are locked in on something that's important to you, nothing can stop you from pushing forward with that mission, because it's like, if I don't do this, what I've been called to do, no one else is going to do it, not the way that I can do it. And each of us have that within us. So that's what I would say is the first thing. Another thing is that, and this applies more specifically. Well, this is kind of tied into everything too. It's not about me, man. That's another thing I had to learn too, because at a certain period, especially when I first started out, there was a whole lot of self-promotion. Not that there's anything wrong with talking about what I'm doing, but at a certain point, man, I just started to get out the way. Like I'm like you, where your platform, your podcast, of course, it's promoting what you're doing, but you have people on because you actually are interested in what they do. And you're providing a space, like you're providing a space for me to be able to come on here and share what I'm doing. And I'm grateful for that. And so I do the same thing on my platform. Just, it's not about me. Let me get out the way and show you what these people are doing. Like, you'll figure out what I'm doing just by listening to these other people and checking out other episodes. But yeah, man, that's a great question. I love that question. What's the biggest thing you've learned?
it doesn't take a lot to change somebody's life. It just takes that one little trigger, I think.
That's a great point, man. Yeah, I have the same approach where you're just hoping one thing that you say or one thing the guest says makes an impact on someone's life. And it's worth it to continue to push forward with doing recordings and doing interviews and episodes or anything you do in life. Because, you know, at the end of this, even if one person is affected by what we're doing here today, then it was all worth it, you know?
Definitely. Yeah. And yeah, and along the way, you know, if it's hopefully it's fun as well and you can enjoy it and enjoy the conversations, and I certainly do. And you know, getting to talk to people like you who are doing really cool things out there, helping other people, and you know, it's cool to get to have this conversation and have you on the podcast. And I do appreciate you coming on tonight.
Yeah, man. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate what you're doing, man. Before I say yes to coming on any podcast, I always check out a few episodes just to see what the person is doing. And I knew after listening to a couple of seconds, I was like, yeah, this guy's legit. I like what you're about. And after having this conversation, you know, I'm a fan of what you're doing even more. Not just what you're doing, but who you are. So it's been a pleasure, man. I appreciate you having me.
And that is the episode. Thanks for tuning in to The Weight Room. Just want to remind you before we head out here to subscribe wherever you're listening. You can find The Weight Room on pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. So go subscribe or follow or whatever it is on that platform. And then also please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. That really helps us out. And, you know, it enables us to reach more listeners and help more people. And that's what this podcast is all about. So with that being said, though, that is it for this episode. Stay tuned for more. We always have great stuff coming out on a Monday, Thursday schedule. Other than that, that is it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you picked something up. And, you know, stay tuned for more. I'm out.